Hello, everyone. So welcome to the second day of the 2020 EBA Policy Research Workshop. It's the 9th edition, and for your information, we have more than 370 registered participants. As housekeeping instructions from the beginning, please keep yourself muted unless given the floor. Please also turn off your videos, except of course for presenters, and please use the chat box to ask questions to the speakers, as we'll have after this keynote speech. During the chat box, please also identify yourself with the name, surname, and affiliation. Okay, so agenda for today. We will start today with a keynote speech by Markus Brunnermeier. I see him already there, ready to present us a very nice keynote speech. Then we will have also at the end a small part for Q&As like we had yesterday, using the chat like I mentioned. And then after that we'll have a session on digital payments, then a break, and then final session on new risks, business models, and systemic risk interconnected with these new technologies. So I will now start by mentioning very briefly in a very text about Markus Brunnermeier. We were very pleased that he has the availability to talk with us during this hour. Markus Brunnermeier is the Edward Sanford Professor at Princeton University. He is a faculty member of the Department of Economics and Director of Princeton's Bendheim Center for Finance. He is also a research associate at Nevers, CAPR, and CESISFO, and a member of the Bellagio Group on the International Economy. He's a Sloan Research Fellow, Fellow of the Econometrics Society, Guggenheim Fellow, and the recipient of the Bernasser Prize, granted for outstanding contributions in the fields of macroeconomics and finance. He's also a member of several advisory groups, including to the IMF, the Federal Reserve of New York, the European Systemic Risk Board, the Bundesbank, and US Congressional Budget Office. Brunnermeier was awarded his PhD by the London School of Economics with a very rich career. Please welcome, a warm welcome to Markus, and he will today will give us his views with a keynote speech entitled Money in the Digital Age. And Markus, the floor is yours, and many thanks once again.
Thanks a lot, Samuel. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity to give this keynote here in the early morning for me and afternoon for you in Paris or wherever you are. I think it's money is an exciting field, and it's especially exciting that we are moving to a new phase of money. It's a little bit like the transition we are faced from digital coins, or from regular coins to bank accounts and deposits. Now we move to another phase, and there are many open questions and many issues which come back, which we have thought as academics before. So let me think about some aspects and some questions which come up. Of course, there's digital money everywhere. There's M-Pesa, there's Alipay, WeChat Pay, Libra, and I think the next talk will be about Libra and Libre, as we have seen on the program. So, but what's really new? Of course, we had digital money in form of inside money or deposits for a long time, and digital reserves are also digital reserves by the central bank are digital. What's really new is that we have digital outside money for the public. So the public has much more digital money provided by the central bank itself, and that's one aspect. So the questions which arise is that, will actually private digital money drive out cash? Okay, so here you see a beggar, having two QR codes, one for Alipay, one for WeChat Pay in China. Rather than collecting coins, he's actually much more focused on getting some transfer in his WeChat or Alipay account. And then the other question is, given that everything moves to the private sphere, will central banks lose the grip on monetary policy? Will platforms steal the seigniorage benefits typically the governments get? Okay. Will we have digital dollarization? I will explain what digital dollarization is in a minute. And will we have digital currency areas? So which, if you have a Facebook account, is the Facebook universe a currency area or not? Will CBDC, central bank digital currency, be the answer? And how should these big tech companies be regulated? Should they be handled like narrow banks and have to be forced that the platforms are interoperable? So all of these questions are exciting questions, and there's some new technology coming up and new ways we will interact and pay in the future. And that's why I think we have to understand this and study this. So what I want to say today in this keynote, I would like to focus first on some technological trends, then a new form of currency competition, talk about monetary sovereignty, and then talk about the international monetary system and digital currency areas. Okay, so hopefully I will make a lot of progress on this. I might have to skip some slides given the time constraints. So what are the technological trends? So first of all, of course, we have smartphones now. That's a fundamental shift. So we had e-money about 20 years ago, but you had to go with a laptop earlier on to a supermarket. Now we have smartphones. But more importantly, our life is actually moving much more to a digital lifestyle. So we actually move away from the real world to a digital world where we spend a lot of time on digital platforms and digital ecosystems, because we have essentially a second life there, and we have to pay on this life too. And this is growing, especially with the COVID crisis. Then another element is the big data, artificial intelligence, deep learning, and these allow recommender systems which are way better than what we had ever before. They recommend us what to buy and all this, and they can use this data in big ways and we have never imagined before. And that actually makes the digital space much more competitive than the real space. Fourthly, we have smart contracts and value chains. So these are contingent payments to minimize credit risk. So the smart contracts are automatically executed in a very sophisticated way. And then we will have payments from machine to machine in the Internet of Things. So no human is involved anymore. And then we have, of course, the whole token analysis, and we have distributed ledger technology like Bitcoin and other things, but I will not talk so much about cryptocurrencies today. And then there's also the issue of micropayments. You can charge, half a cent for some payment. If you want to read a certain newspaper article in one newspaper, you might have to pay 20 cents or something we couldn't do in the real world because it's too costly just to collect the payments. And all of these technological trends, they actually will impact the way we think about money. And that's what helps us to restructure this. So let me the first technological trend, which relates to some work I did with Carlos and Rohit Lamba on what we call inverse selection. So what's the idea here? So the idea is that in the olden days, it is the customer, the borrower, the insurance client who had an informational advantage. Think of, if you do economic research, think of Rothschild-Stiglitz type models. You know more about your health conditions. You know more how likely are you defaulting and how profitable your project is than the lender. Now this is shifting. This is very different now. Now we have a setting where the seller or the platform knows more about the default probability you are facing. Okay? They know better the health conditions you have because they can infer from many sources what the health probabilities are that you will actually fall sick, much more than you can. They can show what's the default probability. So the informational advantage is shifting from the customer to the seller or the provider of the service. And of course, this has huge implications for privacy regulation, but it is a huge trend. So that's one, the inversion of power, this inverse selection is very important. So the customer, he knows probably multiple attributes about himself, but the platform can actually combine this multiple attributes into a default probability. They have this machine learning algorithms, they have the deep learning algorithms, artificial intelligence, which allows them to do so. So traditionally, you probably know that if you want to insure your car, if you buy the same car just with a red color, you have to pay a higher insurance premium, because if you drive a car with a red color, you're more likely to default because you're probably, or that's at least what insurance companies found out, a more risky driver, and because you're a more aggressive driver. But of course, these days, through the big data, they can, of course, analyze your Twitter behavior and your Facebook, Instagram, whatever, TikTok behavior, and can figure out much more than you ever would know about yourself. Okay, and that essentially shifts the power, the information rents we can get using some economics lingo is actually shifting to a different arena. So that's the first technological trend. The other technological trend, as I mentioned before, is this big data, artificial intelligence, where there's an economies of scope and economies of scale. So the economies of scope is essentially within the person. So you have unstructured data, textual analysis, which you in traditional regression analysis, you don't have textual data and all that. So now you can run some machine learning algorithm about text and the computer will figure something out. There's the payment. The payment is very, very important because you'll see what the payment behavior is. This guy paying always at the last minute? Is he paying in the mornings? Is he paying in the afternoons? All of this has information, and you can incorporate a lot of diversity elements. And the more data you have, the bigger, the better it is. So the more data you have of one single person, the platform would like to have you on the platform to actually observe all of these things, not only one thing, the payment behavior, but also, social media and everything, and can extract better information from this. And there's, of course, the economies of scale, where it says there's diminishing returns to scale, you might think, but it's actually the other way around. So the larger the company is, the more people it captures, the bigger the data, the better the recommender system, the more attractive this company is. So it's self-reinforcing. Of course, the classic example is Google. Google is providing all the search results, and because we search with Google, Google has a better information how to search. Hence, Google is a more attractive search engine, and that makes more people to go there, and that actually self-enforces it. So there's self-reinforcement algorithm there, or algorithm feedback loop there, which makes it much more attractive to be with Google in the first place. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say. So that's another big trend. So all these new statistical methods actually lead to a radical change in the I/O of the data analysis. Now, the third technological trend I would like to emphasize is this platform and what role essentially platforms and payments play. So traditionally, we lived in a finance world which is very bank-centric. So there's a bank, the main aspect of bank was lending and deposit taking. And then there were payments. Payment was a stepchild. So there was a customer, let's say a saver, giving some funds to the bank, and the bank was passing it on to the customer, A, to some borrower. But payments was just some on the side. It was not paid too much attention. Now, this whole thing is shifting. Now it moves to a payment-centric world. So there's platform arrangement. If you look in China, it's mostly Alipay, and financials, Alipay or WeChat Pay. These are big platforms. And the payments, there's e-commerce, there's social networking going on, everything on the same platform. And then the banks is just one aspect to it. There's asset management to it. Everything is connected to the bank. And of course, social media, everything is connected to this platform. But payment is a crucial information source for that. So payment, from being a stepchild, moves at the center of what's going on. So again, the customer comes to the platform. The platform runs some machine learning algorithms about the default probability, and then says, okay, I have some customers who have a credit score of 325, and then let's banks compete. They will provide some loans through the platform, but the information is with the platform, so the information rent, the profit, is actually going to the payment platform or the platform itself rather to the bank or the asset manager. And that's essentially whether you want to save or you want to borrow, it's the same thing. So the center shifts. So we have a change in I/O, in the industrialization of financial activities, moving away from a bank-centric world to a payment-centric world. Whether we get the shift or not depends very much what the regulators will do. Whether I want to promote this, you might argue that might be beneficial for society to move to this because the informational structure we have, it is beneficial. It serves the customers better ultimately than a banking environment where you only take potential lending and deposit taking information into account, but not all the other aspects. Now, these are the four technological trends I would like to emphasize. Now I would like to understand what are the implications on currencies or on currency competition. Okay, so how do we have to think differently about money and how different forms of currency compete with each other? And when you think about competition, antitrust, it's always a big component of competition is bundling. Okay, so if you think about the old days when Microsoft was bundling the Internet Explorer with the Microsoft environment, and then the European Commission, was going against it, I don't know, 20 years or 15 years ago. It's all about bundling. If you think about money, money is also a bundled product. So the money has typically three roles. It's a unit of account, it's a store of value, and it's a medium of exchange. Okay, so all these three services, these are three different services money provides, and they're all bundled together. And it's not clear that they have to be bundled together. And you can, for example, you might live in a country where there's high inflation, so money is not a good store of value, but because everybody accepts in this country this particularly high inflation currency, it is still used because all of these two services are bundled together. Okay, so that's, you have, for example, often the case that, you have two currencies competing, but often it's the case that you use the local currency even though it's a much worse store of value. And their question is, and the claim is, what we make in this paper with Harold James and Jean-Pierre Landau, is that there's will lead to an unbundling of the three roles. So there will be some currencies which actually will focus much more to be the store of value. So that's, you can save in it, you hold your wealth in it, it gives a lower inflation, higher return, higher real return. And there might be other currencies which give you a better medium of exchange because it's more easy to transfer them. And why will this be the case? Because now you can switch from currency to currency at a mouse click, or not even mouse click, I should say, at a voice command on your cell phone. And you can switch from one currency to another currency. In the olden days, it was not so easy to use your euro bills and convert it into some other currency. Now you have your wealth in some currency in a millisecond before you buy something, you just convert it into currency you want to have. So there's a decline in switching costs. And this decline in switching costs actually reduce the network externalities we typically have. And that's actually the key to understand. So there will be more competition. The competition will be much more fierce because there will be the bundling of the three elements will not be there anymore. So we can unbundle the different roles of money. So it will be much harder for some countries to have a local currency and enforce the local currency because people will not hold it. They will just, if you need it as a medium of exchange, you just in last millisecond, you switch, but the seigniorage is not there anymore. And there's, of course, the unit of account. I will talk more about unit of account, how you measure things, okay, like meters, Celsius, or whatever, how you measure wealth and how you measure prices. And that actually can change too, because in the olden days, you can just go with your iPhone or with your Google glasses and look at the supermarket and then actually just look and see the price in the most natural thing for you, how you would like to measure prices. It's a similar thing to the language analogy. So the unit of account is very much similar to a language. Right now, all the particular sounds, like the English we're using now, is a way we coordinate it on. So we coordinate it on a certain language. And once we have speech translation software, we can speak each other its own language and it will be just translated. So we will be not locked in by a particular language. The same thing is the unit of account. We will not be locked in. It's much easier to translate prices from euros into dollars, into Swiss franc or whatever. And you do it in the way you find most comfortable to evaluate the prices. And so that's the unit of account is not locked in either. So that's this unbundling. Then there's, of course, rebundling. The argument is that there's this unbundling, and then there's rebundling with the platform, the ecosystem, which ecosystem you live with. Okay, so if you live in the Facebook ecosystem or you live in the Alipay and financial Alibaba platform system, this will be rebundled so that you will get discounts if you use the currency in this particular ecosystem. Your smart contracts will be more easily executed. If you do it in this ecosystem, you get a better recommendation what you might like next, so the recommender system will be better. And there will be currencies which are fine-tailored to your taste. So there might be some currencies which say, okay, we really respect privacy. Other currencies say, we don't respect privacy. We give you a good recommendation system and give you a higher return. So for example, Apple is pushing this privacy aspect. They might come up with their own currency saying, but we protect your privacy, but that means you get a lower interest rate because, we can't sell all your information to some advertising agency and so forth. And there's, of course, the private sector has an incentive to create some closed ecosystems, okay? But so that they're switching from one to the other one is not so easy. So again, there's this unbundling of the traditional roles, 3 roles of money, but then there will be rebundling with the platform and the ecosystem. I think that's something to keep in mind. And that second one will lead to a product market differentiation in different forms of money and lowers competition. And the private sector has, of course, huge interest to have not so much competition. So let's talk about these private platforms and currency competition. So platforms will have greater control over the digital currency. They will better able to monitor, restrict, and punish the use of it. Okay, that's this IO perspective of money, where instead of if you the ECB, you create essentially some money and hope that it promote the economic activities. Here you can control everything. You can see everything. The platform sees every payment and everything, and you can use it much more strategically, how to charge you for using for certain things and not charge you for other things, observe everything and so forth. In particular, the platform can design, how much does it cost to swap a euro for a token on this platform. Okay, there's an entry. There might be some cost for being active on this platform. You have to pay some markups. You have to perhaps give up some privacy. It might be even a negative. It might be a subsidy if you on the Amazon platform. If you on the Amazon platform transact and use the currency or credit card of Amazon, then you actually get a lower payment. You get some 5% subsidy or something. And once you're in this platform, it might be very hard to get out. It's like a Berlin Wall, where the Berlin Wall was for the former GDR, where you couldn't get out. It was not to keep others out. It was in order to lock you in. Essentially, that's something which might be very prominent as well. And essentially, often people say they lure you in, they lock you in, and inflate your currency tokens away. Or that's essentially, it's a little bit like Hotel California. You get in, but you can't get back out anymore. Or that's essentially, the platforms have a certain optimal strategy, and that's actually what would be the case. Now, then there is, of course, across the platforms, and there's a competition and the corresponding currency as well. So with public money, the problem is that if you use current public money, there's no digital convenience. So I call it digital convenience. I cannot use my euro bills to pay something online. It's very hard. I need some digital form of doing that. There's no exit cost. So to get out of the euro, the ECB is not imposing some exit cost. And the monetary policy of the ECB is very much based to handle macro shocks, to manage the macroeconomy and all this. The private platforms have a different strategy. They will choose something less to maximize profits. Now that's a very different objective, and to lock you in and bring you into the platform. So there's competition with the private money, and we will talk about digital dollarization in a minute. And there's competition across platforms. And then the question is, how do you regulate competition across platforms to enforce interoperability, like the European EP system, convertibility, or to impose narrow bank approach, which means you have to lock, if you're using Amazon coins or whatever coins there might be in Europe, you have to be one-to-one a stable coin with the euro, and you have to back all the issuance of your tokens with 100% of reserves. This would be a narrow bank approach. Okay? These are different regulatory aspects the regulator has to decide upon. And of course, there are behavioral biases for customers. You have to keep in mind, that's where you say, hey, people might not see that they might be locked in later on and discount that. And that's one has to take this into account, this Hotel California aspects as well, which private platforms might play on and exploit. Now, what's about this digital dollarization? What's the dollarization? Dollarization essentially is the case when a country loses its own currency because suddenly the dollar takes over. That's why it's called dollarization. So you live in Costa Rica or some smaller country, suddenly people use mostly the dollar, the US dollar, as their currency for invoicing or as a store of value. And this happens, there's a long literature on that happens very nonlinear. It happens very sudden. So first of all, dollar is used a little bit, but suddenly, poof, it happens very suddenly. The same thing happened in the digital space. Okay, so the question is, when will Libra take over a currency of a particular country and will be the primary currency in this country. So typically dollarization happens in small countries, in open countries. Here it's more digital open countries. Okay, so it's small open economies with large informal sector. As anywhere a large informal sector, that's where traditional dollarization is very, very powerful. But if you have a country with an inefficient electronic payment system, that's when you're vulnerable to that Facebook will actually take over or Libra is taking over. Just picking here on one particular could be the digital renminbi taking over or Alipay taking over, especially in Southeast Asia. Or if just to make you a case, I had a friend in China, he lives in Ohio. He says he goes to a Chinese restaurant, when he pays for his food, he always makes a payment with Alipay within the United States. So the payment in the United States is not done in dollars, it's done in renminbis using Alipay tokens. Okay, so because he has an Alipay account and the Chinese restaurant has an Alipay account, and they're paying everything in Chinese renminbis. And it's much more, why? Because it's much more convenient. For the Chinese restaurant, they just put this immediately in a money market fund account that gets 5-6% interest on it. Why would they use a US dollar thing? So you can see how this will radically change the whole system. That's going on at the moment. And this will, at a small scale, but it will be scaled up. There will be much more competition. Of course, there might be, what's in a digital currency area? A digital currency area might be all the Chinese who are familiar with Alipay and have a WeChat Pay account and all these things. There might be one currency area, even though they live in a different jurisdiction. That's a different way of thinking about it, and that's why we came up with this concept of a digital currency area. So, and if you have a country, if you don't have your own social media presence, like Europe, you're also more vulnerable to digital dollarization. Don't get me wrong, digital dollarization will not happen for smaller countries, emerging market economies. That's a big deal. So what are the defense lines? Of course, if you have a lender of last resort capability, that's still, very powerful. And it's not clear that Facebook will provide a lender of last resort capability to their own, Libra banks which might develop. Okay, so it also defense line is that the ECB is developing its own digital currency, and the ECB, as we know, is working on it. So the central bank digital currency is a defense line. It's all another defense line. You make stable coins. You enforce stable coins with 100% narrow banking. I talked about that. And how you regulate these private currencies and private platforms to enforce convertibility, to enforce interoperability, that you can switch out and in a particular currency, in a particular token without any limits. All of these are very, very important in order to see, will the public currency, what role will it play, or will it be diminished in its role or not? And that leads me to the next topic of monetary sovereignty. Will the ECB maintain monetary sovereignty? What does monetary sovereignty mean in the first place? Okay. So sovereignty has many, many aspects, and that's listed here on this slide. One is, you might say, seigniorage. And it comes to your mind, okay, you make so many billions a year, so why would you give up this seigniorage for money creation? That's, if you have a good store of value, you will get the seigniorage. You can do financial repressions in the worst case in order to get the huge public debt level down. So seigniorage rents is some element of monetary sovereignty. This is, from an accounting, you might say, oh, that's a big deal. But from an economist perspective, I think the bigger deal is the ability to control monetary policy, the ability to manage the macroeconomy and the business cycle. And the question is, if debt is denominated mostly in Libra, if most payments are done in Libra, it could be that you cannot manage the macroeconomy anymore. You can't stimulate the economy or slow down the economy depending what the business cycle is. And then you have to understand what is the key in order to be able to control monetary policy. And out of the three roles I've mentioned, the key role is essentially unit of account. It's not the store of value. That's for the seigniorage income. It's not the medium of exchange. It's the unit of account. The unit of account means in what currencies are debt contracts written. That's when you have a financial transactions perspective. That's what I saw. If the debt contracts are still written in euro, even if Libra, because now it's a stable coin, it's Euro Libra, then it's fine. As long as you can shift the interest rate on the euro around, you can actually then also do some monetary. If the debt is written in euros, then you can still control monetary policy. If you're New Keynesian, it's all about stickiness. No? In what currencies are prices sticky? Okay. So if most transactions, like I don't know when my friend in Ohio is buying in a Chinese restaurant or his Chinese food, are the prices sticky in renminbis for his menu or in dollars? Okay. So that's a little bit what one has to learn. That's, the literature in macro focus mostly on the stickiness. I think it's probably more important, or at least equally important, we focus on this denomination of the nominal debt, okay? Because once you can change the value of nominal debt, you can shift wealth around, you can shift risk around, and that's what my analysis here on the I theory of money, where I stands for intermediation or inside money, is very much focused on. Okay, that's I think the key on monetary sovereignty to maintain. Then there's of course the power to bail out. If you can print money and people accept your money, you can bail out banks, you can be the lender of last resort of banks. And for this, you can do that if you have some taxing power, so you can recoup what you bailed out others with taxes in the future. And you might see a platform has some taxing power too, okay? Because they can actually charge for future transactions. So having a charging a markup on future transactions is some taxing power as well. But of course, the fiscal taxing power by governments will be even larger most of the time. So the question is, what's the fiscal space? If you have a government which has used up most of its fiscal space and cannot expand, then actually expand tax revenue in the future, if it's needed to be, then it cannot bail out, then it might move on to a platform who has more fiscal space, in a sense of fiscal, meaning in a platform space, I should call financial platform space. And then there's also the power of monetary sovereignty, the power to exclude. US has used, weaponized the US dollar quite a bit against Iran and others, North Korea, and they go extend the power way beyond the United States. Even if European companies want to do some business with Iran, it's not possible because you shut down the dollar usage. And of course, that's essentially something which goes away too. So the more the US is using this, the more the whole payment system is actually shifting to some other form of payments like Bitcoin and other things. And that you can lose your monetary sovereignty if suddenly all international transactions are done in some other currency, Bitcoin or whatever it is, or Libra, then which are not stable coins with the United States, then the US would lose some of this monetary sovereignty in this regard. Now, right now, we have a two-tier system. So right now, we have governments and we have private banks. So we have a two-tier system. We have outside money, which is provided by the government. The government is specifying the unit of account, what's the euro, what's the value of the euro, their settlement among the banks and reserves and all this. So the government is very involved in that. But the digital money you are holding in your digital account is mostly inside money. So that's provided by private banks. And so currently we have a two-tier system. In the future, we will have a much more interaction between the government and the banks as we have before, and the big techs. Okay. And the question is, what role will banks play and what role will big techs play? And financial regulation has a huge impact here on what the power should be. And it's not clear, actually, from a social perspective. It might be better if everything is done by the big techs, because the banks are just sleepy, they haven't kept up with the payment system. It's actually good to bring the information from other aspects into the light. And so one option is that the banks become more like big techs and they become platforms on their own, and you see certain Spanish banks and other banks moving that direction. Or the big techs take over. And of course, China has an edge. They have an edge that Alipay and WeChat Pay are way ahead of the rest of the world. And the question is how it will play out. And then the question is, what will be the interaction between the government and the private sector? And what many people favor is this India stack model. It's like the railroads, like the tracks themselves are in the public hands, but the trains can be, the phase then with the public will be on the private sector, because the argument goes, the background infrastructure, you want to have a very solid, nothing can go, and then you want to have a fierce competition on the private sector. And then the private sector is probably better to have a better interface with the public, to manage final payments. It probably puts more into that emphasis. The convenience, the digital convenience, is probably never so well handled by the public sector than by the private sector, because they can put more resources there and they are probably more agile to react to things. And of course, and then I mentioned narrow banking model. So like 1.5 years ago, the People's Bank of China imposed this narrow banking model on them. So let me, how seigniorage is created. So let me just probably mention briefly, I will jump over that, but let me just mention how seigniorage is distributed at the moment. Who is getting the seigniorage? Is it really the government or is it the private banks? And to a large extent, actually, the private banks get the seigniorage at the moment. So if you think of a bank's balance sheet, so which I've drawn here, there are two types of assets. There are some assets which are illiquid, but in order to hold the illiquid assets, you get some higher dividend payments, you get higher interest payments. There's some other assets which are very liquid, which means you can easily pass on to others, you can pay your rent with and other things. So they're very convenient in this dimension, but because they're so convenient, they get away with it by paying a lower interest. Okay. So what a bank is doing, it actually holds some illiquid, high interest bearing assets and issues some liquid but low interest bearing assets. And that's how banks make profit. Okay. They essentially create liquidity. It makes a convenience for others to pay more easily. And that's actually what the banks are doing. And so that's what we have here, and that's the rents they're getting. So the question is how much of these rents are generated by the government producing new currency, that's some of it, but also the banking sector gets a lot of seigniorage, if I call this seigniorage for money creation in a broader sense. And how big the seigniorage is from the private sector depends how competitive the private banking sector is. If it's very competitive, then some of these benefits are passed on to customers. If not, it's not passed on. And that's essentially what seigniorage is. So just to see, it's not only the government getting seigniorage, it's also currently the private banking sector getting a lot of seigniorage. The question is, if this seigniorage is then competed away with the big tax, perhaps that's not such a bad thing because it will benefit the customer as well. So let me just illustrate this graph here. And so that's a little bit thinking now. Let's suppose this ECB will introduce central bank digital currency. So what does this mean? Like you and I, we can also have some account with the ECB. Okay, so you have a bank account with your private bank, but you can also have a bank account with the ECB and you can make payments with some digital euro. Okay. So what I've depicted here is a little bit of is an economy, very simple economy, where there's some firms, they have some physical machines, they issue some loans, and the loans, the banks grant them the loans, so that's on the asset side of the banks, on the liability side of the firms. The firms have some equity, the equity is held by the households. And the banks also issue deposits. Again, deposits are held by the households. The firms might hold some of these deposits too. And then they issue also some bank equity, which is also held by the households. And then there's the consolidated balance sheet of the government. So it's the government and the central bank. And the central bank, of course, have some deposits or some cash, which is also held by the households. And there's some government bonds the government is issuing, held by the households. And the central bank might have some government bonds as well. So that's why I put it on the asset side and the liability side. So it essentially could net it out. But then it's importantly, what people often ignore is that the government has future tax revenue. It's an asset. It can impose future tax revenue, which is an asset for the government, but it's a liability for the households because they have to pay these taxes. So I can think of this as an asset. And who owns this government in the central bank? It's essentially citizens. Now it's also, so there's an implicit government equity, I call it government equity, which is actually also owned by the households. Okay, so that's how the economy looks like. Now the question is, can the ECB introduce some digital euro, so meaning issue more money in form of digital without affecting the macroeconomy? And that's often argued, if the ECB moves to digital euro, you will hurt the banking sector and this will actually be a bad thing. So that's what I did here. So let's just say now they issue more money, so because they also digital euro, so this will crowd out the deposit holding. So remember, the private households had some deposits here. Now the household said, oh, why, if I don't need to have so many deposits, I'll hold more of this digital euro, so that crowds out the deposits. And the insight of this paper with Dirk Knüppel essentially is that if the central banks then pass through this deposit holding to the banks, it's a very simple idea in this basic form, but then actually you can actually introduce CBDC without distorting anything in this economy, okay? Because essentially the ECB is issuing more digital euro, that's actually the crowds out deposits. But if the ECB were to pass on this funding through LTRO and all these things, PEP and whatever they do, to the banks, then actually it doesn't really distort the economy at all. Okay, so there's a neutrality result. It's like a Modigliani-Miller type result. There's an equivalence result. If you do the right thing, you can keep everything the same as before, and there's no crowding out and other things which many people are afraid of. Okay. So that's about monetary sovereignty. So what do you want to say about monetary sovereignty? There are all these many dimensional sovereignty, seniorage, and then there is controlling the business cycle. And for seniorage, even now, part of the seniorage goes to the private sector, and introducing a digital currency on behalf of the central bank is actually a best response for the cash going away. And it's not the case that actually it can crowd out private banks. If it's done the right way, you can do it in a neutral fashion. That's the message here. Now let me spend my last 3-5 minutes on the international monetary system and digital currency area. So the question is, what's a currency? Okay, a currency, something belongs to the same currency if the same unit of account and if it's convertible. Okay, so same unit of account is, for example, it is all dollars. So is Libra its own currency? When Libra is initially conceived with a different unit of account, was definitely a separate currency. Now let's look at the Euro Libra. Is the Euro Libra a unit of account? It's not a separate unit of account, so is it a separate currency? And that depends on whether it's convertible. So that's how our definition of convertibility. So the convertibility is actually not so black and white as one thinks. You can have, for example, if you have a currency board and you back it 1-to-1, you have a stable coin, is this a separate currency or is it not? Okay, so you have the same unit of account, a stable coin has the same unit of account, but it's typically, people would say it's a separate currency. On that depends whether it's just backed by a currency, like a currency board or a stable coin. We would call this as if that's a separate currency. If it's convertible, like a checking account, it maintains the value, it has the uniformity of money, so a singleness of money, but then actually it's the same currency, it's part of the same currency. So that's essentially what's very important to understand. And then there's also a difference between account-based and token-based settings. By account-based, there's a third party approving the payment. So I make a payment to Samuel, and Samuel gets some payment, but the bank, I make let's say a transfer, a payment transfer, the bank has to agree to that and say, okay, yes, I made a payment. Or if it's a token pay, if I give him $20 bill, euro bill, that's the finality of the payment happened. It's token based. There's no third party approving this or anything. I gave him my token, boom, it's done. That's a big difference. But I think what's really a currency is if it's only backed, a stable coin is a separate currency. Of course, if it's a separate unit of account, it's a different currency. Now, once you know what's a different currency, we can talk about currency areas. And I mentioned earlier already that there's a own unit of account that's already a separate currency. But a separate digital currency areas will be, a lot of platforms will have their own currency. There will be, on a certain digital environment, and it's not necessarily geographically. So it's not the Euro area or China or the United States or certain parts in Africa forming currency area. It is much more in a different space. It's in a digital space. And it's attractive because of price discounts. There will be easier price discovery, transparency within, or it might be, just that you identify with a certain group, they will be part of this group, and that's why you're part of this digital currency area. Now, having said this, what will be one big component will be privacy considerations. Okay, so privacy considerations will determine which If you care a lot about privacy, you will use a different currency compared to somebody who doesn't care about privacy currencies. And then actually the physical space will come back because privacy is still regulated based on legal borders we have them at now. So you have a privacy regulation for Europe at the moment, you have a privacy regulation in the US, and within the US, in California, you have a different privacy regulation than the rest of the US. And that will still then determine the national borders will still matter in this regard. But digital currency areas will be probably much more driven by privacy regulation than anything else. Now, there's, of course, for the international monetary system, there's also digital synthetic world currency you might want to keep in mind. And I've made some proposals on this, how to create a safe asset for Europe, the SPs. You might have heard about the SPs. I've done the same thing for the emerging market economies, similar idea. Just make sure that flight to safety across borders is rechanneled with Nick Wan, one of my students. We talked about the GLOSPIS, a global safe asset, where you can have the same idea applied there. So let me sum up. I think digital platforms are a big deal. So if you think about all the things which has changed, it is essentially digital platforms and the power of artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, and so forth, which will create a big shift in our world, in our lives. There will be digital ecosystems we want to live on. And payments is just extremely valuable. Everything is driven by data. Data is the new oil, as people say. And there's an inversion of the industrialization of financial activity. It moves away from lending and borrowing only some banking activities. Payment is back. It's not only a stepchild. And the platforms have recognized this and they play with it. There is an unbundling of the traditional three roles of money that enhances currency competition. But then there's a rebundling with some other roles, especially in connection with the digital platforms. And that actually reduces the competition. Okay? And there will be potential digitalization. Is this good or bad? I don't know. If you have a country which is just hunking up inflation, is hurting its own citizens, then the Libra is taking over. Perhaps it's a good thing. So you can't have a Zimbabwe anymore where you have hyperinflation because people will all switch to Libra, and Hayek's dream will finally become true when Hayek proposed in 1976 during the high inflation periods to have some currency competition. How you do this competition across platforms depends on interoperability and convertibility regulations, and to what extent you limit product differentiation in the money space. In my view, what's really important, I like competition, is to have the monetary sovereignty guaranteed for the government to manage the macroeconomy. And that's primarily, it's not about seeing rich. That's one aspect. It's also not negligible, but to be able to manage the monetary sovereignty, the whole economy. And for this, you have to protect the unit of account. That's essentially, when you see Libra 1.0 moving now to Libra 2.0, that was essentially achieved. But now Facebook says, okay, we have a Euro Libra, we have a Dollar Libra, and so forth. And then we have the new international monetary system, and we will have many digital currency areas. It will not be the case that in euros you only pay with euros. In the euro area you only pay with euros, in the US you only pay with dollars. People will pay with different currencies. They might switch back and forth. You might have 37 currencies in your wallet. Oh, sorry, on your iPhone. And that's essentially what's going on. So coming back, what's Bitcoin and Libra? Is it a big change? Yes, it woke up many guys. Will it stay? Will we lose Libra and Bitcoin down the road? I think it's a little bit like Napster. Remember Napster? Napster really changed the music industry. Napster is not around the way, but without Napster, we wouldn't have Spotify and other things. So things move. I think these are big catalysts. So Bitcoin and Libra will be big catalysts changing the world. Will they stay? I don't know, probably not. But it's a little bit like Napster in the music industry. Bitcoin and Libra will play a similar role. With this, sorry for running over for 4 minutes. I hope we still have some time for Q&A.
Many thanks, Markus, for this very rich presentation. A lot of food for thought for our sessions after. We have already some questions from the audience. Let's start with first with Kim. asking if you see a currency or a payment solution has a natural monopoly. In that case, currency competition might not be cost efficient, like having two railroads running side by side or two mailmen serving the same route. If so, how do you see the costs and benefits of currency competition? And will currency competition always be monopolistic competition with associated monopoly rents?
So it's a little bit tricky. So there is, of course, a tendency towards natural monopoly, but also with the new technology, the switching costs are going down. So the natural monopoly tendency is actually going down in a sense. And there might be, you would like to have a more one standardized setting. So in currency, it's actually good to have not too many different things floating around. You would like some competition, let's say 1, 2, 3 of them in order to have some better competition, have some fierce competition between them. It could also be if you have too many floating around, it might be confusing and too wild of an environment. So there is a tendency to have natural monopolies. But if you go back to the train, it might be natural to have the tracks organized by the government and there's no competition on the tracks, because you don't want to have 7 tracks running in parallel each track offered by a different private company, and have some one track, and then what's operated then on the trains themselves can be much more a fierce competition among themselves. But that's, to find the right arrangement between public-private partnerships, as well what's done by the governments and what's done by the private sector. That's a difficult thing, and we have to figure out really where are the market failures in this regard. But having natural monopolies, to some extent, as argued before, the tendencies to have a natural monopoly is actually going down because the switching costs are coming down. And the private sector has, of course, the incentive to raise switching costs, so make the interoperability low and also reduce convertibility. And that's where the public sector, the regulation has to step in and say, okay, no, if you want to run a currency, it has to be, you can swap from one currency to another one very easily without fees and can get not only in, but also out of it. So out of token fees, or we call this in another paper with Jonathan Payne, I call this into token fee or out of token fee. So if you want to get out of this token, you should be easily be able to get out. It shouldn't be a Hotel California where you can only get in and then you're stuck and you can't get out. You can't get your money out anymore.
Many thanks. A second question from Ruggero Manenti, Bank of Italy, with the context. It's not the case that the American Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, sets forth in the same provision that the Congress shall have power, the question moved, shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and all foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. This is because it was already clear that having a single centrally managed unit of account to use as money has created advantages. First of all, a dollar in New York is the same as $1 in LA, like using the same weights and measures. So the question is, so could you please elaborate a little bit more about the risks posed, for instance, sorry, my question is moving, for instance, to the trust in old currencies, liquidity, etc., by allowing different and competing kinds of money?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. Let me first say he's very, very right that actually looking back in history, we can learn a lot. And many things which are now, many questions which are coming up, we should actually go back more than 100 years to figure out what happened then, and many problems will reappear, okay? Now, the other aspect I would like to stress and congratulate his question essentially, in the olden days, in the free banking era, where we can learn a lot from the free banking area in the United States, you had to think about accepting a check, what currency it was in and what or not, which bank issued it, because the default probability was different and were different discount rates going from region to region. And that creates some additional costs and inefficiencies. And that's what I mentioned earlier, having not one currency is a big cost. So if you have one currency, a same unit of account in, let's say, the euro area is a big advantage. And that's, I think, very important for the ECB to protect that, because otherwise you don't know, is this worth more, is this worth less? So if you through the FDIC or deposit insurance, you know, a certain bank account is worth 100 euros and the other bank account is also worth 100 euros. You can just swap one for one. There's no informational asymmetries. And what we typically don't like in any financial claims is this informational sensitivity. So if you have information insensitive instruments where I don't have to worry, you know, is it worth so much or is it worth that much? Does the other party have more information than me? So there's asymmetric information that creates inefficiencies, and then the markets, because of the Lemons problem, a la Akerlof, will lead to market failures and will lead to market breakdowns. So that's why there's actually having one benchmark, one unit of account has a huge advantage, and having some guarantee saying, well, this is part of our currency, and 1 euro in this and 1 euro in that is the same thing. You can swap it in this way or that way. We saw it in the euro crisis when you suddenly say, oh, is a euro from that country the same as a euro from another country. Suddenly you have to think about this, and the individual person wanting to pay something, wanting to pay for some pretzel or some what to eat, should not worry about the difference across these currencies, which in the free banking area you had to worry essentially. Should bond investors worry about this? Yes, to some extent, because you need some information sensitivity there, but not at the level of payments.
Okay, many thanks. So let's just for another 2-3 and to close. One question from Christoph. He would be interested to hear your views on potential financial stability implications for the banking industry. So there is extensive literature studying how competition in traditional banking relates to financial stability. The question. In the world you described, there seem to be many new factors to reconsider.
Yes. So, I mean, this is a big question. So in a sense, I could give another keynote on that. So I don't even know where to start. Let me just say one thing. So if you have private entities providing currencies, the private entities have to have a deep enough balance sheet to support the currencies if there's a run on this currency. We saw this on stable coins, and a willingness to support the private currency. So for example, if Facebook is issuing some private currency in their own unit of account in Libra, is Facebook willing to put their own balance sheet behind it if there's a run on its Libra currency? I don't know. I mean, it's open. They might say, okay, it's not profitable for us. Now we don't support it, and let the whole currency collapse. So that's different from a public entity like the ECB saying, okay, we will support the currency no matter what, whatever it takes, essentially. And that's really very, very different. So then you can see if you have a financial system which is to a large extent based on different currencies, you have to worry whether private entities are able to support it, and if they're able to support it, whether they're willing to support it. And that creates another layer of complications. But there are many, many facets to it, and we can have a whole conference on that.
Exactly.
But that's just one important aspect I would like to highlight.
Yes. Another question from our colleague Cyril Pauvel from the French Supervisory Authority, ACPR. He mentions that Green has shown that an international monetary system with multiple international currencies is more unstable than a system with a monopoly. So which digital currencies are we heading towards more financial instability? How can we model that?
So that's potentially, yes. It's less obvious than Barry probably thinks. But of course, if you have a uniform standard and you have a hegemon, the hegemon is really playing a beneficial role for the rest of the world. I think it's a more stable arrangement, because otherwise, if you have a multipolar system, it's not clear how these different players then will interact with each other. So it's, in this sense, of course, it relies very much that you have a hegemon who's really providing public goods to the world economy, to the financial system. And I think the US played a very, very important role in this, and actually played a good role even in the last few years. So I'm pointing primarily towards the Fed. you see, for example, in March 2020, the economy was about to implode, the global economy, and in particular the financial system. If you look at the capital flows out of the emerging economies into the United States, it was at record levels. It was way bigger than the global financial crisis. It was way bigger than the taper tantrum. There was huge capital flows out of the emerging economies, and the Fed intervened very aggressively in March 2020 and stabilized the system by first cutting interest rates, but also creating these new repo facilities, which allowed emerging economies to repo their own treasury holdings in exchange of reserves from the Fed. And that actually made a huge difference. I don't think we would live in the same world if they wouldn't have done that. And it showed the willingness, and all of the swap lines, it showed the willingness of the US Federal Reserve System to really act as a responsible hegemon. Of course, there's much more cooperation on the central bank side than on the politician side, but one has to keep this in mind. So far, I think I would agree with Barry Eichengreen on this, but it also relies very much that you have the right Fed policy in place, who is, the backbone of the international monetary system.
Okay, so I think we have to close. Sorry for the remaining participants with many other questions. We have to close. So many thanks, Markus, for this very, very rich presentation with a lot of information and a lot of good things for us to think as well. And let's keep in touch. Let's keep in touch. Yes. Okay. Many thanks. Many thanks. Bye-bye.